My mother slid a stack of loan papers across a flower, dusted prep table, pressed her finger down twice on the signature line, and said, "Sign where I flagged it. Honey, family doesn't keep score. 9 years. I worked in that bakery. 16,940 hours. I was never paid $1. Here is what she didn't know that morning. Buried in that folder was an older loan, $18,500, with my name on it, and I had never signed it. And here is what she could never have imagined. Today, finding what people hide inside dead relatives' paperwork is my profession. 6 months ago, I sat across from her at that same prep table at 4:30 in the morning, and I informed her, calmly, in numbered order with documents, exactly what those 9 years were about to cost her, to the dollar. My name is Mara Quinn. I am 29 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I work in probate law, the part of the courthouse that sorts out what the dead leave behind, and who tries to steal it on the way out the door. Before we go one step further, if you have ever been the person your family counted on for everything, and counted for nothing, type the single word hours in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story is already sitting somewhere in your chest, the subscribe button is right there. This channel exists for people like us. Now, to understand that morning at the prep table, I have to take you back exactly once. One jump. 9 years before the morning I walked out. After that, I promise, we move forward together in a straight line, through everything they did, everything I built, and everything I found. All the way to now. 9 years before that morning, I was 14 years old, and my grandmother tied an apron around my waist. For the first time, her name was Eleanor Quinn. Everyone called her Nell. She had opened the bakery on Marion Street in 1989 with her late husband's life insurance money, and she owned the whole building it sat in. The storefront, the kitchen, the 2 apartments upstairs. Quinn's Bakery. Gold letters on green paint. She was small and quick, and she measured nothing and burned nothing. And she smelled like cardamom and dish soap. And I loved her the way you love, the one adult who actually sees you. My mother, her name was Carol, and she was Nell's daughter-in-law, ran the front of the shop by then. My father drove the delivery van and agreed with whatever my mother said last. My older brother, Wade, was 16 and allergic to aprons. That first morning, Nell taught me cinnamon rolls from a recipe card with a burnt corner. She kept all her recipes in a dented tin box, mint green, with a rooster painted on the lid. She'd owned it longer than she'd owned the bakery. When I rolled the dough, too thin, she didn't correct me out loud. She just put her hands over mine and slowed them down. At the end of that shift, my mother counted out the register drawer and said what she always said, bright as a bell. We don't do paychecks for family, sweetheart. Family doesn't keep score. And my grandmother, without looking up from the little green notebook, she was always scribbling in, the one I assumed was for supply orders, said something, under her breath. I half heard it, and I fully forgot it. For 9 years, she said, somebody should hold on to that green notebook. It matters more than anything else in this story. 8 years before that morning, I turned 15, and the bakery quietly became my second school. Weekends at first, then weekday mornings before class, because Wade has practice. Then closing shifts, because Wade has applications. I learned laminated dough and wedding cake, stacking, and how to talk a bride off a ledge over buttercream. Customers started asking for me, by name. My grandmother slipped me folded 20 sometimes, from her own cardigan pocket, and told me not to mention it. My mother never slipped me anything but a schedule. Here is the thing I need you to understand about my mother, because it is the thing that took me 20 years to understand myself. She never screamed. She never hit. She was pleasant and organized and admired at church. And she ran our family the way a bank runs a branch. Every kindness was a deposit she expected back with interest. Every one of my objections was flagged, filed, and used later. When I asked at 16 whether I could get paid like the weekend dishwasher got paid, she didn't get angry. She looked wounded. She said, "The dishwasher isn't going to inherit any of this, Mara. You are not an employee. You are the future of this family." Then she put me on the schedule for Sunday. You couldn't fight her, because she never swung. She just kept books. You weren't allowed to see. 5 years before that morning, I graduated high school with a partial scholarship to study nursing at a state school 2 hours away. I had the acceptance letter on the refrigerator for 11 days. Then Wade's first year of college tuition came due, and the bakery's ovens failed inspection the same month. And my mother sat me down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd made specifically for this conversation. She said, "The bakery couldn't survive the busy season without me." She said, "It would only be 1 year." She said, and I remember the exact sentence, "We invest in this family together, and the family pays everyone back in the end." 1 year became 2. 2 became 5. The scholarship expired quietly, the way milk does. Nobody ever announced it. I just noticed one day that the letter was gone from the refrigerator, and a work schedule was hanging where it used to be, from 18 to 23. I worked the bakery full-time, 4:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., 6 days a week. Busier, in wedding season. No paycheck. Room and board in my childhood bedroom. Gas money from the register when I asked. And the same sentence, over and over, whenever my face showed arithmetic. Family doesn't keep score. If you've ever done years of invisible work for people who called it love, you already know the worst part. It is not the money. It is that you start doing the math in your head at night, and then you feel ashamed of yourself for doing the math. She counted on that shame. It was the best luck she owned. 3 years before that morning. This would have been the spring of 2016. 2 small things happened that I filed away as nothing. First, my mother needed my Social Security card for the accountant. Payroll was finally coming, she said. Real wages. Once the expansion loan cleared, I handed the card over across the prep table. She gave it back 3 days later with a smile and a lemon bar. And payroll never came, and I felt petty for noticing. Second, in that same stretch of weeks, she started having me sign things. Tax forms, she said. Insurance renewals. Permits. Always a small stack. Always the flagged lines. Always while my hands were covered in flour, and a timer was going off somewhere behind me. Just the yellow tabs, honey. I signed maybe 6 documents that spring without reading one of them. I was 20 years old and tired down to the bone. And she was my mother. Remember those yellow tabs? That detail comes back with a cost attached. 15 months before that morning, my grandmother had a stroke. It happened on a Tuesday. In the kitchen, between the second proof and the morning rush. She was 79. I was the one who found her on the floor by the walk-in, and I was the one who rode with her in the ambulance, and I was the one holding her good hand when she woke up and couldn't make the left side of her face agree with the right. She survived it, but she couldn't run a register, couldn't sign checks with a steady hand, couldn't climb the stairs to her apartment above the shop. She moved into a care facility called Maple Crest, 20 minutes away, and my mother stepped forward to handle her affairs. the bills, the banking, the building. To do that, she had Nell sign a power of attorney. If you've never dealt with one, it is a simple, common document. It lets a person you trust sign your name and manage your money when you can't. It is a paper that says, act for me. It is not, and hold on to this, it is not a paper that says, help yourself to what is mine. My mother framed it as devotion. Someone has to protect Mom's interests. At church, she was a saint that year. She visited Maple Crest every Sunday after service. 45 minutes, with cut flowers and that bright bell of a voice. I visited on Thursdays alone, after my shift, with a bag of whatever we'd baked that morning. Those Thursday visits are the only part of those 9 years I would not sell back. Nell's speech came back slowly, and crooked, and mostly private. She spent words carefully now, and saved most of them. But some Thursdays she'd grip my wrist with surprising strength, and study my face like she was proofreading it. One Thursday that fall, I know now it was October, she seemed lit up from somewhere, almost smug, like a woman who has just balanced a ledger. She patted my hand and said one full, clear sentence. It is handled, sweetheart. I thought she meant her laundry. I said, that is great, Grandma, and cut her a slice of pear cake. You'll want to remember that Thursday, 2 months before that morning, on the 3rd of February, my grandmother died in her sleep at Maple Crest. The aide who called us said she went easy, which is the kind of thing aides say, and which I chose to believe anyway. The funeral was at St. Brigid's closed casket, standing room only, because half of Columbus had eaten her cinnamon rolls at some point in their lives. My mother wore navy and received condolences, like a hostess receiving coats. My father stood where she put him. Wade flew in for 51 hours. I don't remember crying. I remember checking that the reception trays stayed full, because that is what my hands knew how to do with grief. A week later, my mother called me into the bakery office. And this is the scene I want you to see clearly, because everything that follows grows out of it. She had the mint green recipe tin on the desk, the dented one with the rooster on the lid. She pushed it across to me the way you'd push a parting gift at a retirement lunch. The lawyer finished going through everything, she said. The estate goes to keeping the business alive. That is what Grandma wanted. Everything into the bakery, the building, the accounts, all of it. But she wanted you to have this. A small pause, timed like a musician's. That is everything. Honey, I know. It is not much. But you know how she was. Family doesn't keep score. The recipe box. 60 years of index cards. In a dead woman's handwriting. That was my inheritance. 9 years of 4:30 mornings. And I got a tin rooster. And here is the part that shames me, and will make perfect sense to some of you. I said, thank you. I actually said, thank you. Then I carried the box out to my car, set it on the passenger seat like it might be fragile, and drove home with my hand resting on the lid the whole way. I didn't ask to see the will. It didn't even occur to me that I was allowed to. That is what 9 years of family doesn't keep score does to a person. It doesn't just take your hours. It takes your idea of what you are permitted to ask. 6 weeks before that morning, the first crack showed, and it showed in the most boring room imaginable. A property management office off Sawmill Road, where I was applying for a 1-bedroom apartment. $640 a month. My first attempt, at 23, to live a life with my own front door. The leasing agent typed and waited, and then her face did a small, polite thing that I have since watched happen across 100 desks. She turned the screen slightly away from me. Your application's been declined. It is the credit score. She hesitated, then slid a printout across. You are allowed a free copy of your report. I'd look at it if I were you. If you've ever sat in a plastic chair while a stranger's screen decides what you are worth, you know exactly how loud that silence is. I pulled the report that night at the kitchen table, on my laptop, and there it was, in the flat font that all disasters arrive in. An equipment loan from Hartwell Community Bank, opened in March of 2016. $18,500. Original borrower, Mara E. Quinn. Status, charged off. Charged off is bank language. It means the bank gave up on collecting the money and stained your name instead. The stain lasts 7 years. With 3 years of interest and fees, the balance had grown to $23,000. Let me put that number where you can feel it. $23,000 was more than I had ever held in my life. In total, added together, across 9 years of work, it was 3 full years of the rent on that apartment I'd just been refused. It was a debt the size of a small nursing degree, borrowed in my name, in the exact season my mother had needed my Social Security card for the accountant, and a stack of yellow tabs signed in flour. I want to be honest about what I did with that information, because this isn't a movie, and I wasn't brave yet. I didn't call the bank. I didn't call the police. I called my mother. She listened. She sighed. That specific, patient sigh. And she said, "Banks make mistakes. Constantly, Mara. It is probably a mix-up with the bakery's accounts. We have so many. I'll have the accountant untangle it. Please don't go making calls and embarrassing this family over a paperwork error. Please don't go making calls." I've thought about that sentence for years. It is the only time she ever showed me her cards. Because an innocent woman says, "Call them right now. Get to the bottom of it." Only a guilty one needs your silence, and needs it politely. I said, "Okay." I said, "Okay, stay with me," because 6 weeks later, she overplayed her hand. And this is where everything changes. The morning I left. My 0 hour. The one every date in this story hangs from. Was a Friday in April of 2019. I can give it to you minute by minute, because I have replayed it more times than I've slept. 4:30 a.m. I unlocked the back door with the brass key I'd carried since I was 15. It lived on my ring between my car key and a bottle opener, and I started the ovens and pulled the first proofing racks. Same as 3,000 mornings before. 5:50 a.m. My mother came in early, which she never did, carrying pastry boxes from a competitor, which she never did, and a green folder, which I had never seen. She was warm that morning, warm in the particular way that made the back of my neck pay attention. 6:10 a.m. She cleared a corner of my prep table, right in the flour, and laid the folder down. The bakery was expanding. She announced a second location in Westerville. Wade was moving home to run it. Wade, who had not touched dough in a decade. The bank just needed signatures from the whole family. Because, and she smiled here, the whole family benefits. She opened the folder. Yellow tabs. A pen laid across it at a 45-degree angle, like a place setting. Sign where I flagged it. Honey, family doesn't keep score, and I would have. I need you to sit with that, because it is true. My hands were in it, before my head was. But the pen was out of ink on the first stroke, and while she went to the office for another one, I did something I had never once done in 9 years of yellow tabs. I turned the pages backward. Behind the new loan application was supporting paperwork. The bakery's credit history, stapled, for the bank's reference. And 3 pages into it, was a photocopy of the original March 2016 equipment loan. $18,500. Exta. Hartwell Community Bank. Borrower. Mara E. Quinn. And at the bottom, above my printed name, a signature. It was my name. It was not my hand. Whoever wrote it had drawn the M. In 2 strokes, I've made my M in 1 motion. Since the 4th grade, it is the kind of thing nobody on earth would notice, except the person who owns the name. And, as it turns out, the kind of thing courts notice very much. I stood there with flour on my wrists, looking at the mix-up. The paperwork error. The thing the accountant was untangling. Photocopied and stapled into a folder. My mother was using to borrow even more money against the family. She came back with the pen. She saw the page I was holding, and I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do. Not guilt. Calculation. A teller. Counting the drawer. That is old business, she said, level and unhurried. Sign the application, and after the closing, we'll clean all of that up at once. I said, I didn't sign this one, and my mother looked at me. Pleasant, patient, church, lobby calm, and said the truest thing she ever said to me. Mara, everything you have came through this family. There is no version of you that exists without us. Now sign the papers, and let's not make this a thing. There is no version of you that exists without us. I put down the photocopy. I took the brass back door key off my ring. It took a second. My hands were shaking, and the ring fought me, and I set it on the prep table in the flour, next to her pen. I said, then I guess we're about to find out. I took my coat and the mint green recipe box from my car. I'd been meaning to bring it upstairs for weeks, and I remember deciding with insane clarity that it was the one thing in that building that was actually mine. I had $41 in my wallet, a dead scholarship, a wrecked credit score, and a 9-year hole, and my resume shaped like a family. She didn't follow me out. She didn't have to. She was certain the way she'd been certain for 9 years, that I'd be back by the weekend rush. The little bell over the front door swung and announced me on the way out, the same as it did for any customer. If you know what it costs to walk out with nothing rather than stay and be spent, do me one favor before we keep going. Hit subscribe. Not for the numbers, because the next part of this story is for every person who has ever had to start from a parking lot, and I want it to reach them. Now, we move forward. One direction. I promised. Everything from here happens after that Friday morning, and I'll keep telling you how far after. The first 6 weeks after I left, I slept on an old high school friend's couch. She asked no questions and left the porch light on. I applied to 41 jobs. The credit score followed me like a smell. Apartments declined me. A car loan declined me. One hiring manager at a medical office looked at my 9 blank years and asked, kindly, what I'd been doing with my life. And I said family business, and she said it doesn't show up anywhere. And I said no, it wouldn't. 2 months after I left, I got hired at a diner on Cleveland Avenue, 5 a.m. shift, because I was the only applicant who didn't flinch at the hour. The owner paid weekly. The first Friday, he handed me an envelope with my name on it, and I stood in the walk, in cooler for a full minute so nobody would see my face. $286. The first money I had ever been paid in my life. I was 23 years old. I am going to compress the next 2 years for you, because I promised you a story, not a diary. Here is the shape of it. Diner mornings. A studio apartment above a nail salon that approved me because the landlord liked me more than he liked my credit report. $390 a month. A loud old radiator. Entirely mine. 2 keys on my ring again. And both of them opened doors that belonged to me, a second-hand laptop, a budgeting notebook where I wrote down every dollar in and out, and I do mean every dollar. And if you've ever rebuilt a life from an air mattress and a folding table, you know that notebook wasn't about money. It was about proof. Proof that I existed on paper. Proof that somebody, finally, was keeping score of me, even if it had to be me. And once a year, on the 9th of November, Nell's birthday, I'd take down the mint green box, pull the cinnamon roll card with the burnt corner, and bake a half batch in a studio apartment with an oven the size of a glove box. I'd eat one at the folding table and put the card back behind its divider. It was the only tradition I kept. It was the only family I kept. 2 years and 5 months after I left, in September of 2021, I answered a help-wanted posting that changed the direction of everything. Although it looked like nothing. File clerk. A small law office downtown, Halloran and Prout. Second floor. Frosted glass. Estate law. Wills. Trusts. Probate. Probate, if the word is new to you, is just the court process that happens after someone dies. The will gets filed, the property gets counted, the debts get paid, and whatever is left goes where the dead person said it should go. It is grief, translated into paperwork. The interview was with the senior partner, Josephine Halloran, Joe. 60-something, silver crop, reading glasses on a chain. The general bearing of a woman who has watched 4 decades of families audition their worst selves in her conference room. She read my 1-page resume in about 9 seconds. Diner. Bakery. 9 years. No wages. She looked at me over the glasses and said, 9 years, family business. And it ended badly enough that you are here. Am I close? I said. Close enough. She hired me for $14 an hour and never asked about it again. That is the first thing you need to know about Joe. She listens like a filing cabinet. Things go in. They stay safe. Nothing rattles. Here is the second thing. And it is the sentence this whole story turns on, about a year into the job. So, 3.5 years after I left, I was helping her prepare a case. A son had drained his dying father's accounts using a power of attorney, and the man's daughter was in our conference room, wrecked, because her brother was charming and everyone believed him, and she had spent 2 years being told she was crazy, greedy, dramatic. At some point she cried out. I could hear it through the frosted glass. Nobody is ever going to believe me over him. And I heard Joe's voice come back, level and almost gentle. You can't out-argue a liar, sweetheart, but you can out-document one. She said it the way you'd tell someone, the time. And I stood in the file room holding a banker's box. And I felt that sentence go through me like current. And I will remember it for the rest of my life. You can't out-argue a liar. But you can out-document one. That case settled. By the way, the brother's own bank statements hanged him. Nobody raised their voice, even once. So I stopped planning arguments I was never going to have. And I started learning the machine. I took the paralegal certificate program at Columbus State, Knights. 2 years. Paid in cash from the budgeting notebook. Passed in the spring of 2024, 5 years after I left. Joe moved me from the file room to a desk with my name on it. And by the following year, I was her probate paralegal. The person who assembles estate files, reads deeds and inventories for a living. An executor, while we're here, is simply the person Will puts in charge of carrying it out. It is a job with one rule. The stuff is not yours. You'd be amazed how many people cannot survive contact with that rule. 6 years. I did that work, and here is the strange, human, embarrassing truth. In 6 years of pulling other families' probate files, files that are public record, files any person can request at the courthouse for the cost of copies. I never once pulled my own grandmother's. I told myself I didn't need to. I'd been told what the will said. Everything into the bakery. I had built a good, quiet life out of not looking backward. A one-bedroom with a real oven, a paid-off used car, a credit score. I'd scrubbed back to respectable one dispute at a time, except for the one stain Hartwell Community Bank would not remove without a fraud investigation. I had never had the stomach to start. Starting it meant naming my mother in a police report. Every year, I decided next year. I kept that door closed because, deep down, I already knew exactly what was behind it. Some people will understand the next 6 years of my life without me saying another word. Stay with me now, because the door didn't stay closed. And when it opened all at once. Last November, 6.5 years after I left, and 8 months before I am recording this, two things landed in the same week, and together they broke the lock. First, the Westerville location made a local list, best new bakeries in the Columbus suburbs. There was a photo. My mother, my father, and Wade standing under a new sign, Quinn's Gold on green, with a quote from my mother about family tradition and how nothing here was ever about money. A customer left a comment asking whatever happened to the granddaughter who used to do the wedding cakes on Marion Street. Nobody answered it. Second, that same week at work, I was assembling a probate file for one of Joe's cases, and I hit a document that stopped my hands. A deed, a house, transferred out of a dying woman's name 3 weeks before her death, signed not by the woman, but by her nephew, using a power of attorney, signing her name to give her house to himself. There is a plain language phrase for that in our office. Self-dealing. Using the pen you were trusted with to write checks to yourself. Courts void it. Void as in undo it. Erase the transfer. Put the property back. Almost every time, because a power of attorney is a duty, not a shopping pass. I sat there looking at that stranger's deed, and I heard my mother's voice from the funeral week. Smooth as icing, everything into the bakery. The building, the accounts, all of it. That is what Grandma wanted. And for the first time in 6.5 years, I asked the question, like a paralegal, instead of a daughter. Says who? Where is the paper? That night, November 9th, Nell's birthday. And no, I did not plan that. The calendar did. I sat at my kitchen table with the half batch of cinnamon rolls cooling, and my laptop open. And I did the thing I do 40 times a week for strangers. I looked up my own grandmother. I want to walk you through what I found, the way I found it, one page at a time. Because it took 3 documents to take everything from me, and it took 3 documents to take it back. Document 1. The will. Franklin County Probate Court, public record, case opened March of 2019, 1 month after Nell died. Right around the time I was walking out of the bakery. My mother, as executor, had filed Nell's will, because the law requires the will to be filed, whatever the family plans to do about it. I paid the online fee, and 11 pages loaded onto my screen. Last will and testament of Eleanor R. Quinn, signed at her lawyer's office in 2015, 4 years before she died. Witnessed, stamped, unambiguous. I am going to read you the sentence that mattered, as close to exactly as I am allowed. The building at 44 Marion Street, the storefront, the kitchen, the 2 apartments upstairs, the ground under all of it, to my granddaughter, Mara Eleanor Quinn, not the business. The business, the bakery itself, went where my mother said everything went, into the family. But the building the bakery stood in, the single most valuable thing my grandmother owned, appraised in her estate paperwork at $410,000. She left to me by name. My middle name is Eleanor. She left her building to the girl she named it into. There was also a savings account at her credit union that the will split between her grandchildren. Same file. 1 page further, the estate inventory. The executor's sworn list of what the dead person owned showed that account holding $416 at her death. Nell had saved money, like a depression baby, her whole life. 1 year under a power of attorney, and her life savings was $416. I'll let you sit with that. The court eventually did, but here is what I need you to feel. Sitting where I sat, with cinnamon rolls going cold, for 6.5 years, I believed I'd been left a tin box. The truth had been sitting in a public file, available to me for the cost of a download. Since 1 month after she died, my grandmother never cut me out. I was her headline. So why didn't I own a building? Document 2 answered that. The deed. County Recorder's Office. That is the public shelf where every property transfer in the county gets stamped and stored. I searched 44 Marion Street, and there it was, a quitclaim deed. The fastest, bluntest way that exists to move a property from one name to another. Dated the 15th of January, 2019, recorded the next morning. 19 days before my grandmother died, transferring the building at 44 Marion Street from Eleanor R. Quinn to Carol A. Quinn, and on the signature line, in handwriting I had known my whole life, it said, Eleanor R. Quinn, by Carol A. Quinn, attorney in fact. Attorney in fact just means the person holding the power of attorney. She hadn't even forged it. She didn't think she had to. She had signed her own mother-in-law's name, in her own hand, on a document giving herself the building, while its owner lay 19 days from death in a bed at Maple Crest, and she had walked it downtown and had it stamped like a parking pass. The will said, the building goes to Mara, so 19 days before that will could speak. She emptied it. The will, I was never shown, gave me a building, the estate, no longer owned. That was the whole trick. That was the machine. Under 9 years of family doesn't keep score. I didn't cry that night. I want that on the record. I sat very still for a long time, and then I did what 6 years at Halloran and Prout had trained into my spine. I opened a fresh legal pad, and I started a file. Now, if you know how these cases actually go, you know. I still had a problem, and it was a real one. Self-dealing under a power of attorney is presumed improper, and courts unwind it. But presumed isn't automatic. Her lawyer would argue. Nell wanted it. That Nell asked for the transfer to keep the building with the business. A dead woman can't testify. It would be my mother's church voice against a stack of inferences, and my mother's church voice had beaten better hands than mine. I needed Nell's own voice, and Nell had been gone almost 7 years. Document 3 had been sitting on my kitchen shelf the entire time. It was 3 days later, and this time I was looking, because a sentence had been circling me since I found the deed. Nell's voice. That October Thursday at Maple Crest. Pear cake on a paper plate. It is handled, sweetheart. My grandmother did not say things she didn't mean, and she had left me exactly one object on this earth. So I did to the recipe box what 6 years of probate work had trained me to do to everything. I stopped looking at it and started measuring it. I emptied the cards onto my kitchen table, divider by divider, and when the tin was bare, I noticed what a tired 23-year-old had never once noticed. The inside was shallower than the outside, almost an inch shallower. I pressed one corner of the floor, and the tin bottom, the bottom I had looked at 1,000 times. Tilted up out of square, it was a false bottom, a tin sheet, cut to size, resting on a folded dish towel. My grandmother had built herself a 1/4 inch of privacy inside a rooster tin, and then she had put the tin in my mother's hands to give to me, and my mother had handed me the evidence herself, at a desk, with a smile as a consolation prize. Underneath, there were 3 things. The first was the green notebook, the one from my first shift, at 14, the one I'd assumed was supply orders. It was a time ledger, column after column, page after page, in my grandmother's cramped, upright hand. Dates, my name, hours in, hours out, running totals. Every single week from the autumn I turned 14 to the week of her stroke. She had missed nothing. Snow days. I got sent home early. Double shifts. In wedding season. 9 years of my invisible work, made visible, in pencil, by a woman everyone thought was writing down flower deliveries. The last page had a total, boxed twice, 16,940 hours. Let me do this arithmetic for you, because Nell already did it for me. She'd written the wage right there in the margin, at $8 an hour, $1 less than she paid the weekend dishwasher. 16,940 hours is $135,520. That is not a number. That is a paid-off nursing degree, twice. That is a decade of the rent I couldn't get approved for. That is what family doesn't keep score actually cost. Kept score of, to the 1/4 hour, by the only person in that building who ever thought I was worth counting. The second thing was a document with a notary seal, the raised stamp that certifies a real, identified person signed in front of a licensed witness. It was titled, Revocation of Power of Attorney, dated October of 2018, 3 months before the deed, signed by Eleanor R. Quinn, in a slanted post-stroke hand, witnessed by a mobile notary who had come to Maple Crest, with 2 staff members signing as witnesses. Revocation means exactly what it sounds like. She took the power back. In October, my grandmother had legally canceled my mother's authority to sign anything as her attorney. In fact, quietly, properly, with a notary at her bedside, and had told no one in the family, which means the deed, signed in January, 3 months after that cancellation, wasn't just self-dealing. It was signed with an authority that no longer existed. In plain words, my mother had signed a dead permission slip. The transfer wasn't merely improper and voidable. It was void from the moment the ink dried. It had never legally happened. At all. It is handled, sweetheart. She hadn't been talking about laundry. She'd been 82 pounds in a facility bed, half her mouth on strike, quietly out-documenting the woman who thought she'd already won. My grandmother saw the whole play coming, and she couldn't stop the deed from being signed, but she could make sure that when someone finally looked, it would shatter on contact. The third thing was an envelope with my name on it. The letter inside was short. Her handwriting after the stroke, tilted like everything on the page, was walking uphill. I am not going to read you all of it, because some of it belongs to just the 2 of us, but I'll give you the end. She wrote that the box was the safest bank she'd ever owned, because Carol had never once been curious about anything that couldn't be spent. She wrote that the will was at the courthouse, and the truth was under the towel, and that whichever Quinn woman found them was the one she'd left them to. And the last line, above her name, said, Your mother always says, family doesn't keep score. Somebody should, sweetheart. Somebody did. That is when I cried. The only time in this whole story. And I'll admit it to you, plainly, alone, on my kitchen floor, at 1 in the morning, in a puddle of recipe cards, holding a pencil ledger against my chest, like it could breathe. Not because of the building, because for 9 years I'd done that math in the dark and hated myself for doing it. And the whole time, 1 floor up, behind a register, somebody had been keeping score of me. Somebody thought my hours were worth a notebook. If you have ever found proof, actual physical proof, that you were never crazy, you know it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like grief with receipts. I cried until it was done. Then I got off the floor, photographed every page under good light, drove to the office at 2 a.m., made certified copies, and put the originals in the firm's fireproof safe. The daughter part of me was finished for the night. What got up off that kitchen floor was the paralegal. Here is what I did not do, and I want to be precise about this, because the internet loves a revenge montage and real life punishes them. I did not confront anyone. I did not post anything. I did not touch my own case with my work access. Not one search. Not one favor. The first thing I did the next morning was walk into Joe's office, lay the folder on her desk, and say, I need to be a client. Joe read for 20 minutes, without a word, the will, the deed, the revocation, the ledger. Then she took off the reading glasses, and she looked at me the way I imagine she looked at 40 years of conference rooms. And she said, I can't be your shoulder and your lawyer at the same time, so I am going to be your lawyer. She walked me 2 doors down and put my file in the hands of her partner, and from that day on, everything ran by the book, because the entire point was the book. Over the next 8 weeks, this is last winter now, December into January, the machine did what the machine does. Her partner filed in probate court to reopen my grandmother's estate and void the deed, attaching the revocation. He hired a handwriting examiner for the Hartwell loan, a certified forensic document examiner, which is a person courts trust to say whose hand held the pen. I filed the identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission, the federal office that handles stolen identities. And then, finally, 7 years late, I sat in a police station on a Tuesday lunch hour and filed the report I'd been afraid of since I was 23. The officer took 40 minutes and my mother's name. My hands were steady. Hartwell Community Bank opened a fraud investigation. Banks keep original loan files for exactly this reason, and theirs still had the 2016 application, including, and I did not know this was coming, the second page, a store credit card application. From the same week, same handwriting, same 2-stroke M. My mother hadn't just done it once. She'd done it in bulk, on a quiet afternoon, the way you run errands. And then, in the 3rd week of January, after everything was filed, stamped, and beyond recall, I asked my mother to meet me, one time, at the bakery, on Marion Street, 4:30 in the morning. She came. Of course, she came. She thought I was finally coming home. I hadn't stood in that kitchen in almost 7 years. The ovens were already warm. Someone else's racks were proofing. My brass key was long gone from the counter, but the prep table was the same table, and the flour smelled the same, and my mother stood across it in her good coat with her church face on, and said, I knew you'd get past all this eventually, honey. I put 4 folders on the table. I had rehearsed this with no one. I did not raise my voice at any point, and neither did she, and that made it worse for her, because calm was supposed to be her weapon, and I had come to inform, not to argue. I said, first, Grandma's will left me this building. I have the certified copy. You've known since March of 2019. Second, the deed you signed to yourself is void, not challenged, not void. Grandma revoked your power of attorney 3 months before you signed it, in front of a notary and 2 witnesses. The court has the revocation. There was never a moment that this building was legally yours. Third, Hartwell has the original loan you signed in my name, a forensic examiner, and a police report with your name on it. The bank, not me, decides what happens next. I'd get a lawyer who isn't the family's lawyer. Fourth, I slid the last folder across the flower, the way she'd slid one to me, photocopies of a green notebook. 16,940 hours. I said, you always told me. Family doesn't keep score. You should know. Grandma kept it anyway, to the quarter hour. My mother looked at the folders, and then at me, and I watched her sort through every tool she owned. The sigh, the wounded look, the bright bell, and find that none of them worked on paper. What she finally said was, you would do this to your own family. After everything we did for you. And I said, the last thing I have ever said to her face. You are right, Mom. Family doesn't keep score. But landlords do, and the courthouse does. And as of this month, you are dealing with both. Then I walked out through the front past the register, and the little bell over the door announced me like any other customer, which is all I ever was to her, and which no longer hurt. She did not go quietly. They never do. The escalation took 3 shapes, and I answered all 3 the same way. Shape 1, volume. 14 voicemails. In the first week, they cycled through the whole catalog. You are being manipulated by lawyers. Grandma wasn't in her right mind. We'll prove it. Then, when the estate case docket went public, Mara, please, this will destroy your father. I saved every voicemail, answered none, and forwarded the lot to her partner's office, where they were logged with timestamps because everything in my life gets a timestamp now. Shape 2, presence. In February, she came to Halloran, and Pruitt stood in the lobby in the good coat, told the receptionist she was my mother, and it was a family emergency. Joe happened to be walking through. I heard about it afterward from 3 separate coworkers, with joy. Joe looked at her over the reading glasses and said, every word you say here gets written down, Mrs. Quinn. In my experience, that is rarely what your kind of emergency is looking for. My mother left. She did not come back. Shape 3, the letter. In March, I received 4 pages, handwritten, from my mother. I read it once. Standing at my kitchen counter, it contained the words sacrifice, ungrateful, poison, and legacy. It used the phrase, everything we built. It did not contain anywhere, in any form, the word sorry. I put it in the file. Even her letters work for me now. And then, one by one, in flat institutional language, the consequences arrived. And I want to give them to you the way they came to me, in plain envelopes, because this is the part of the story where the score gets settled, and it was settled entirely in paperwork, which is the only justice that can't be argued with. In March, the probate court ruled. The magistrate's decision was 11 pages, and the sentence that mattered said the January 2019 deed was executed without authority and is void. Void. As written, the building at 44 Marion Street was retitled according to Nell's will. I read that decision in my car on my lunch break, and I did not cry. I'd already spent my one. I just sat for a long time, feeling the ground change ownership underneath me. The estate was reopened. The $416 savings account got a court-ordered accounting, which is a sworn, line-by-line explanation of where every withdrawn dollar went. Her answers are due this fall, and her lawyer's filings read like a man bailing water. In April, Hartwell finished its investigation. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The examiner's finding. The loan signature was not mine. The loan was reclassified as fraud, erased from my credit history like it had never existed, and the full $23,000 became the legal problem of, quote, the responsible party, along with the bank's referral to the county prosecutor. What the prosecutor does is not mine to control, and I've made peace with that. I didn't build this to send my mother anywhere. I built it so that every institution she ever hid behind now has a file with her name spelled correctly. And in May, my lawyers sent one final envelope, certified mail, to Quinn's Bakery, 44 Marion Street. It was a lease. For 35 years, my grandmother let that bakery live in her building rent-free. Her gift, freely given. I priced the space at fair market rate, $2,300 a month, appraiser's number, not mine, with a standard 1-year term. Nothing cruel, nothing vengeful, just the thing my mother never once gave me, an honest accounting, in writing, of what somebody's work and somebody's property are worth. They didn't sign it. In June, they announced on the bakery's page that after decades of serving the community, the Marion Street location was closing so the family could focus on Westerville. The comments were full of hearts and one unanswered question about wedding cakes. My mother chose to walk away from the corner her whole church lobby legend was built on, rather than pay me 1 month of what she'd taken. I want to tell you, that surprised me. It didn't. People who spend their lives refusing to keep score would rather lose everything than see the total. So no, there is no reunion at the end of this. Nobody hugged. At a rehearsal dinner, my father has never called. He agreed with whatever she said last for 40 years, and silence was always his native language. That is the truth about these stories, that the movies won't tell you. You don't get the family back. You get something smaller and quieter, and yours. I got one thread, though, and I am keeping it. Wade called me in February, after the filings went public, and asked to meet at a coffee place halfway between us. And the first thing he said was, I never checked whose name was on anything. I just signed where she flagged it. Yellow tabs, both of us. He gave a sworn statement about the signing sessions and about my handwriting, unprompted, against his own mother. It cost him Sunday dinners. We get coffee on the first Saturday of every month now. It isn't warm yet. It is honest. Where I come from, honest is the luxury item. Last week, this is now, July of 2026, I stood inside 44 Marion Street with a new brass key on my ring. The ovens are cold, and the gold letters are coming down, and a young couple toured the space on Tuesday. 2 women, first bakery, terrified and lit up in that way. I remember from 4:30 mornings. Their lease starts in September, at a fair rent, on paper, with every hour of their build-out negotiated and written down. Because in my building, everybody's work gets counted. Before I locked up, I taped one recipe card inside the flour cabinet, where you'd only find it working. Cinnamon, rolls, burnt corner, Nell's, hand. The mint green box lives on my counter now, and the false bottom finally holds what it was always waiting for. A certified copy of a magistrate's decision, folded in thirds, resting on top of a pencil ledger. My inheritance turned out to be my inheritance, after all. The consolation prize was the deed, the proof, and the last word. And here is the last word. For 9 years, the most powerful sentence in my family was family doesn't keep score. My mother was right about it. In the end, she just had the family wrong. Family doesn't keep score. Grandmothers do. If somebody in your life ever spent you like a resource and called it love, put the word hours in the comments. I mean it. I read them all. and share this with the one person you know who is still doing the math in the dark and feeling ashamed of it. Tell them what Joe told me. You can't argue a liar, but you can out-document one. I am, Mara. Thanks for staying to the end. Somebody counted your hours, too. I'd bet the building on it.